Hi, everyone. Ed Bixby here from the Global Green Burial Alliance, and this is Spotlight Now. Today, I'm here with Ed Snyder, who is a Philadelphia based artist, photographer, and instructor known for his work in cemetery photography and writing. Ed is the author of two books, Stone Angels and Digital Photography for the Impatient, and authors the weekly Cemetery Traveler blog. He is also a member of the Philadelphia Photographic Society, the DaVinci Art Alliance, and the Philadelphia Photo League. So, welcome, Ed.
Hey, thank you, sir. I appreciate the time.
Well, we appreciate you coming on today. So let's, Ed, you and I know each other, and I know the good work that you do, but let's introduce you a little bit to the audience and learn a little bit more about your background as an artist and what first drew you to cemeteries as a subject for photography and writing.
Well, I love to do that. Maybe just to begin with, I did recently have a new book published called Cemeteries of Philadelphia. I'm sorry, Abandoned and Forgotten Cemeteries of Philadelphia and Its Environs. So that's sort of the current status and what I'm interested in doing right now. Looking back. I've probably been doing this for about 25 years. I started writing the Cemetery Traveler blog about a lot of my experiences back in 2010. And I think the reason that I started getting interested in cemeteries was mainly because of the statuary, the art. I did fine art photography, mainly of cemetery angels all over the US and some in Europe. I sold images in shows and had gallery exhibitions and things like that. And it honestly, it was probably 10 years before I ever read an inscription on a stone. I was just fascinated by the carvings, the sculpture, the artistry, bronzes, marbles, granite, what have you. And I think as you would probably agree, there's more to cemeteries than just what first caught your eye. And I think that's probably true for most people. And it's fascinating to me that there are so many aspects involved, things that we assume happen, maybe mostly behind the scenes, plus all the amazing things that people do to keep cemeteries intact. One of the kind of the outcomes of my book was that someone pointed out to me that it is really kind of an assumption that cemeteries are forever places, that they are fragile properties. And you're very well aware of that because of your work. And I try to point out to people currently that cemeteries need a lot of tender loving care. They're businesses, right? And even a small church graveyard has to be treated as a business. Money has to come from somewhere to keep the grass cut, to reset fallen headstones, to fix the fences. And a lot of this is apparent to me now after 25 years of research and field work and writing, but it may not be obvious to most people.
No, you're absolutely right. And it's important for the viewers to know that, I like what you've said. These places are places of history and respect respect and dignity really needs to be shown to them. And it does take either revenue or people being involved. It takes a village to take care of these places. So that's a really good point. And, you know, I've seen some of your photography. It's absolutely beautiful. When you're looking and deciding which monuments and symbols are interesting, how do you come about the cemetery scenes in your photograph? Like, what are you looking for? Is it a multitude of the lighting and the background, or you know, what catches your eye?
Well, I wish I had some examples right here to show you. I was not prepared to do that, but I used to call these certain lighting conditions angel skies. and that is an approaching storm where a marble statue is front lit by, say, the setting or the rising sun, and there are dark clouds in the background. So, a brilliant white marble angel against a dark, cloudy background, or almost a black background, is something that I hunted for years, and it's not easy to find that, but appreciating the statuary, the sculpture as it is, it's almost like the Stendhal syndrome, which is a psychiatric term that describes a situation where you just stand there sort of transfixed at awesome beauty that you were just totally unprepared for. So when I was walking through Mount Vernon Cemetery that you graciously opened up this past weekend, and you cleared a lot of the brush and trees away from memorials and stones that probably had not been seen for 50 years. Um, they were just fascinating to me. The artistry, the individual carving. Yeah, you could have, Italian marble imported and carved, or, carved in Italy and placed in cemeteries in the US, which I'm sure happened at Mount Vernon. But there's also an amazing local, I guess, artisanship that if you travel across the country, and you've done this, so I'm sure you're well aware of this, that statuary and carvings of tombstones varies greatly from region to region. Just, many different regions in Pennsylvania, for instance. A friend of mine just wrote a book on the cemeteries of Lancaster, Pennsylvania, which have a lot of soul effigies and angel heads on the stones, which don't really exist anywhere else in the U.S. Just this pocket around Lancaster, PA. So that really fascinates me. All the individual carvings and artistry that you see across the nation.
Absolutely. And it's really interesting, when you were saying that, I was thinking about a lot of the people who created these, in a time that modern convenience and modern tools didn't exist. It was a true art form. A lot of these people probably were stonemasons and things like that who had this incredible gift, and to them, they didn't realize. I mean, it wouldn't be like today. Let's say maybe unsung heroes in many ways, as far as the beautiful work that they created, and it only lasts now, in the cemeteries that the families have, uh, and I think that's a wonderful thing, and that's what makes it so interesting. And I'm sure many of our viewers are going to, look into yourself, Ed, and the work that you do, because creating these conversations creates the curiosity, as to what is out there and what exists. And with that being said, tell us a little bit about your Cemetery Traveler blog, as well as your, I mean, what was the inspiration behind the blog and the books, and where can the viewers, check them out, or how can they receive them, or get them at this point?
Well, I have two books that came out recently within the last couple of years that are available on Amazon. One is called The Cemetery Traveler, and that is an excerpt. It's a book filled with excerpts of a lot of different postings on the Cemetery Traveler blog. Plus, there is a introduction in the book that does not exist on the blog, which might be the scariest thing you've ever read. So if you buy that book, I would not suggest reading the introduction before bedtime. The other book, the Abandoned Cemeteries, that's also available on Amazon. That just came out less than a year ago, and that is probably the culmination of 20 years experience photographing and researching abandoned cemeteries, and which my first experience with such a thing was Mount Moriah Cemetery in Southwest Philadelphia. So I used to live in that neighborhood, and I had been photographing cemeteries and looking for statuary for a while when I came upon that cemetery. And that was in the early 2000s, so the internet was barely available. So you couldn't just go on the internet and Google search for, wonderful Victorian cemeteries in my area. So I knew about this, and because it was on maps, it had been there since 1855. So I drove to it, and I was just absolutely amazed that it was wildly overgrown. So it is about 200 acres, which is huge. To give people a perspective, Lincoln Financial Field, where the Eagles play in Philadelphia, that's only 15 acres. So if you know how big Lincoln Financial Field is, you could fit about 15 of them in Mount Moriah Cemetery. And there's probably 80 to 100,000 people buried there. And it was abandoned. It was like a Stephen King movie. It was driving through this forest that was filled with mausoleums and statuary and things like that. And uh, there's a huge history associated with that. A friend of mine had just written a book on the history of that particular cemetery. And I spent probably 6 months exploring that place with friends. You couldn't really drive through most of it because it was wildly overgrown and there were trash dumpings. There were piles of building materials and old tires and burned out cars. People would drive them into the cemetery and torch them. It was just absolute mayhem. And I did not understand that. I just had no idea what was going on. And that was really my first exposure to an abandoned cemetery, a term I never heard before, and most people don't understand how such a thing could happen. So a year later, after posting three, maybe four pieces on the Cemetery Traveler blog, and I started that in 2010 actually because I had so many experiences in cemeteries across the U.S. that I decided I would start documenting this. I took a lot of photographs, and I did a lot of research writing for the medical profession that I've been involved in for the last 40 years. So I was used to technical writing and documentation, that sort of thing. And when I published those blogs, they pissed a lot of people off, and I really didn't know why. And it turned out that, really a lot of people took that as a criticism of their neighborhood. And obviously, people read it who had loved ones buried there. But what really happened was there was this wonderful cemetery that just became abandoned. There's a whole story behind that. I won't get into it, but there are a lot of people that were upset. And what I was doing was really trying to get some help from people who could provide resources to do something about that. I had no idea what could be done or even what should be done. I just knew it was wrong. And it turned out that the city of Philadelphia and Yeadon, Pennsylvania, cemetery is so big that it spans two counties. So there was a lot of politics involved. And about a year later, I found myself on the board of directors of the Friends of Mount Moriah Cemetery, working to save the cemetery, to stabilize it, to cut back the forest, to organize cleanups, and to help preserve that history. Because, if a cemetery disappears, there's a chapter of the city's history that disappears as well.
No, absolutely. And I mean, it's hard for I'm sure all of our viewers know of a cemetery property or have been aware of one that probably has been neglected or forgotten. And the funny thing is, like you said, it's not so much that anyone did it on purpose. Sometimes religious organizations, they just disappear. The congregation dies out, and then there's no one left to care for the cemetery. But it takes people like yourself and the communities to rise up and take accountability. And Mount Moriah, for anyone who's never heard of that cemetery, they've done wonderful work there. They've really, turned things around. and that's a success story. So, I commend you for the work that you've done and bringing this subject not only to the forefront but to people's attention. That new book that you've written, I noticed that the jacket of that, has the some stones that are located underneath the Ben Franklin Bridge, which is another story that people would never believe. But it's, as this country evolved, as cities ran out of space, they did things that they probably wouldn't do today in today's, but it's an interesting story in a way to not forget and to know what happened. So thanks, Ed. We do appreciate that. And, I'm sure your perspectives on cemeteries and more memorialization have changed over time through this work. What would you say one of your most memorable projects that you worked on, something that really resonated with you might have been? Was it Mount Moriah or something else?
Well, I would say the largest project was Mount Moriah because I was involved with that project for about 14 years. I resigned from the board of directors back in, I think, March of 2025. And uh, it was a huge project and it's still ongoing. People need to understand that, that cemetery still uh, has no direct owner, but there are people that maintain it and take care of it. And it's easy to be judgmental about why such things happen there. It's easy to be judgmental about why Monument Cemetery was destroyed by the city of Philadelphia back in 1956, and all the tombstones dumped under the bridge. It was actually the Betsy Ross Bridge.
Oh,
Um,
I'm sorry.
yeah, it's fine. But we were not alive at that time. We weren't here. So it's I tend to not be so judgmental. I mean, there were things that the city of Philadelphia did, like what happened at Monument Cemetery on Broad Street, across from Temple University back in 56. Temple wanted the land for a parking lot, so they worked with the city to condemn the cemetery, bulldoze it, move some of the bodies, and then dump the grave markers in the river. So you can be judgmental about that. That one's wrong. That one's dead wrong. And there are people that have very strong opinions about that. And the city of Philadelphia has even done worse than that. But in certain situations, like one of the things that struck me, I guess, about what you just said, how you sort of introduced this question that you asked me. There's a lot of information there that maybe we are assuming that people know, that the general public understands. But I think your introductions to the questions that you're asking me, are just as important as the answers themselves, because this is information the general public is not aware of. How cemeteries, for instance, can become abandoned. So your situation with Steelmantown Cemetery was, I think, kind of telling. And I describe to people that if you go to a cemetery and the weeds are as high as your knees and the tombstones are falling over, the fences are broken, there's a pretty good chance that that cemetery is faltering, that they're in financially bad shape, and they may be on the verge of bankruptcy. Those are situations that, people can provide assistance, form friends groups, donate time or money to help the situation. And these are not, as you are well aware, this is not ancient history. This happens every day. So there is a cemetery in Upper Darby, Pennsylvania called Har Yehuda, and that's a situation where the owner just ran out of money, cannot even keep the grass cut. So that's a current event. That's a current situation. And there are many reasons for saving historic properties. There's many reasons for saving the burial records, which people don't even think about until they go looking for them. There's so many aspects of this. And I guess I was interested in writing the book on abandoned cemeteries because there are so many of them. And in Philadelphia specifically, there are many that disappeared. There are many that were plowed over, that were built on, that were not even moved. There's actually 200 unmarked burial grounds under the streets, under the parking lots and playgrounds in Philadelphia. 200. And there are success stories. So one of the things that I point out in the book is the situation that you're involved with at Mount Vernon Cemetery. Although when the book came out, that was, I think, when you first became involved. So certainly, all the great work that you've done up to this point is not fully documented in the book. But there are other situations. There's a family burial ground on North Broad Street that a descendant just took ownership of and is restoring. There is the Har Hasatim, the Jewish cemetery that was abandoned in the woods in Gladwin, Pennsylvania, for about 40 years. That was just recently taken over by Beth David congregation from Gladwin. So they are not only restoring the grounds, the property, the cemetery, cutting back all the woods and the trees, but they're restoring every individual grave marker on that property. There's 2,500 standing or fallen grave markers. And they believe that that property is such a tangible piece of history of Jewish immigration to America that they feel very strongly about saving it.
Oh, I mean, this is really important work, and it's inspiring to people. And anyone watching this, Ed made a point a moment ago that they're everywhere. I dare to say there's as many abandoned cemeteries as there are ones that are cared for, and that might sound kind of insane to say, but it's true. And most of the time, in my experience, I have found that it's not for any other reason than that the people who own the cemetery are buried in the cemetery and there's no one left to care for it. So it happens a lot, but that's why the communities come forth. Ed has done wonderful work with his books and with his photography. I mean, certainly, if anyone checks Ed's work out, you're gonna become. I think you're gonna become a fan, not only a fan, but someone who's found an interest in cemeteries when maybe you didn't realize that you had that interest. So, you know, as we start to wrap up our interview, you know, what I think would be important for the viewers to know would be what do you hope they'll gain or learn from engaging with your cemetery focused art? What would you like that to inspire in their minds?
Well, a lot of things. I mean, I think you could get out of the work whatever you can. I think that you cannot walk into a cemetery without learning something, whether it be an appreciation for art, a sense of history, maybe coming to terms with your own mortality or the mortality of your loved ones. That I think, in retrospect, it's kind of dark, but um, after years of exploring cemeteries, it really helped me in that respect to come to terms with mortality. And I knew that, for instance, my parents were getting older and they were going to die. And sure enough, that happened. Surprise. But I think that the work that I've done in cemeteries and meeting all of the people that are involved in the the funeral industry, cemetery management, artists, all that sort of thing helped me to accept the inevitable. And maybe that would be helpful for other people as well. So when I started out photographing angel statues, people would buy these and they would unsolicited, they would tell me why they were buying the images. And sometimes those comments were disturbing and, very emotional. And I was almost tempted to say to people, thank you for purchasing this. And I'm glad you found meaning in the work, but I don't want to hear the story. Because I remember I remember photographing two angels, and these were all black and white. These were fine art photographs, and angels mean a lot to people. They're symbolic, for all these reasons. And this one woman was what bought two large photographs of mine at the end of a show. She picked them up and she told me why she was buying them. And I was just never prepared for these stories. Like I tried to brace myself, and this woman said, I'm buying these because they remind me of the angel that stands watch over my 6-year-old son's grave. And it helped her in some way. you know Maybe there was some therapy involved there, a memory. People need tangible objects, I think, to help them remember, which I think is why the work that you do with green burials and all cemeteries. I think a lot of people need a place to go. They need a stone to look at. They need some property to stand on to, look at, say, a stone that's etched with a name and a date or a plaque of that nature, just to have some tangible anchor to that memory.
No, absolutely. And I think that's a good, that's a good lesson learned. I'm glad you shared that with the viewers, is that, going to a place like this does make you less fearful of death and dying. It's, something we all share, in common. And we shouldn't fear it. And these places are beautiful. They tell a story. They represent the people, the forefathers. Look at the year that we are in. This year is a big year for Philadelphia, for our country. Anyone watching this, if you've never been to Philadelphia, not just because I live close by, it's a beautiful city to visit. There's so much history. Please do consider going and being part of the big celebration. And, Ed, thanks for all the good work that you do, and showing people a new way, and of appreciation of these places, because, there really are a wonderful place to visit and reflect and spend some good quality quiet time, enjoying the monuments and the stories they have to tell. So thanks for joining us today, Ed, and tell the viewers where they can learn a little bit more about you, and maybe how they can be involved in some of your work.
Sure. So the Cemetery Traveler blog is on Blogspot. If you Google The Cemetery Traveler, my name, Ed Snyder, it should pop up, and you will see hundreds of postings of stories that I've written over the years. And I do keep them updated. I am writing a small series on cemeteries of Philadelphia that were here for the last 250 years. There's actually about 20 cemeteries that still exist. Some of them are even active burial grounds that are older than the city itself. And many of these are within walking distance of Independence Hall and the Liberty Bell. So if you do visit, take in the cemeteries. These are pieces of property. These are tombstones that our forefathers actually walked on and touched, unlike things like the Betsy Ross House and the building where Thomas Jefferson wrote the Declaration of Independence. Those are fake. Those are not real. The cemeteries are real, and the tombstones are real. And as I said, you could find my books on Amazon, and also the Cemetery Traveler blog will have this uh, several postings related to maybe 6 or 7 different cemeteries that have been in existence for over 250 years. So thank you, Ed. I appreciate your hospitality.
Absolutely, Ed. It was a pleasure. So, folks, support the work that Ed does. It was great to speak with you. And this is Ed Bixby from the Global Green Burial Alliance, and this was Spotlight Now. Just hold on one second, Ed. Let me stop the recording. Yeah, yeah, yeah.